3. Growing roots as feelings deepen. Ethan anonymously helps Olivia's business through connections and investments. Meanwhile, Olivia introduces Ethan to her world of simple joys and authentic relationships. 4. Weathering the storm. Olivia discovers Ethan's true identity through a viral business announcement. Feeling betrayed and manipulated, she confronts him and ends their relationship despite his attempts to explain. 5. Blossoming truth. After separation and reflection, they both realize what they've lost. Ethan makes a grand gesture that prioritizes Olivia's passion over his wealth, proving his love is genuine. Olivia must decide if she can trust him again. Part 1. Chance encounters. The spring rain fell in steady sheets across the city, drumming against the greenhouse roof of Wild Roots, Olivia Winter's struggling botanical sanctuary. At 32, with soil-stained hands and a doctorate in botany, gathering dust, Olivia wasn't where she'd imagined she'd be. The plant nursery, her inheritance from her late grandmother, was 3 months behind on rent despite housing some of the rarest plant specimens in the Pacific Northwest. "Just one more month, Mr. Donovan," she pleaded into the phone, tucking it between her shoulder and ear while misting a temperamental orchid. "Spring sales are picking up, and I've got a potential contract with that new hotel downtown." Her landlord's gruff voice offered little sympathy. "That's what you said in February, Olivia. I've got investors eyeing that property. You've got until the end of the month." The line went dead. Olivia set down her mister and leaned against the wooden workbench, breathing in the earthy perfume of damp soil and green life that had always calmed her. Not today. The bell above the door jingled, and Olivia straightened, forcing a smile as she wiped her hands on her moss-green apron. "Welcome to Wild Roots. How can I?" The words died on her lips as she took in the man shaking rain from his umbrella. Tall and lean, with dark hair curling damply at his temples and wire-rimmed glasses, slightly fogged from the temperature change. He wore a simple gray sweater and jeans that somehow looked expensive despite their plainness. "Sorry," he said, glancing up with eyes the color of brewing storm clouds. "It's just ducking in from the rain. I didn't mean to interrupt your mental breakdown," Olivia supplied with a self-deprecating laugh. "Don't worry, it's a daily occurrence around here." His lips quirked upward, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "Sounds like my kind of place, then." Olivia gestured to the small coffee station in the corner. A touch she'd added, hoping to encourage browsers to linger among the plant's help. "Yourself. It's just drip coffee, nothing fancy." "Perfect," he said, moving toward it. "I've had enough fancy to last a lifetime." As he reached for a cup, Olivia noticed the book tucked under his arm, a worn copy of Thoreau's Walden. A man escaping to a coffee station in a plant shop with Thoreau. Interesting, she ventured. "I've got a Taiwanese oolong that pairs better with existential contemplation than coffee." He looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "You can tell that from my reading material. That, and the fact that you're hiding in a plant nursery instead of one of those sleek coffee shops down the street." She moved to fill a kettle. "I'm Olivia, by the way, Ethan," he replied, watching her with curious eyes. "Ethan Reed." As she prepared the tea, Ethan wandered among the plants, stopping at a rare variegated monstera. His fingers hovered over the leaf without touching it up, gesture that marked him as someone who understood plants weren't decorations to be manhandled. "This is exceptional," he murmured. "The variegation pattern is perfectly stable." Olivia approached with 2 steaming cups. "You know, plants?" "I know a little about a lot of things," he said, accepting the tea with a nod of thanks. "Hazard of my job, which is research mostly." His answer was smooth, practiced, between projects at the moment. Before she could inquire further, Ethan took a sip of tea and promptly spilled it down his sweater as the bell jingled again, startling him. "Oh." Olivia grabbed a clean cloth from her apron pocket. "Here, let me." Their hands collided as he reached for the cloth, sending the cup clattering to the floor. For a moment, they froze, her fingers brushing against his knuckles, an unexpected current passing between them. "I'm so sorry," they said in unison, then laughed. Olivia had no way of knowing that the man dabbing tea from his expensive sweater was Ethan Reed, the notoriously private founder of Genesis Tech. Net worth exceeded billions. that this rainy afternoon would change both their lives forever. Seeds of connection? I still don't understand why you need 17 varieties of ferns, Olivia said, balancing precariously on a ladder as she reached for a hanging basket. 2 weeks had passed since their first encounter, and Ethan had become a fixture at Wild Roots, ostensibly planning an elaborate rooftop garden for his apartment. Ethan steadied the ladder with one hand, his other holding a detailed sketch that grew more ambitious with each visit. The northeastern corner gets different light than the southwestern. Each fern serves a specific ecosystem function. Ma'am, Olivia hummed skeptically, passing down a delicate maidenhair. And I suppose the rare Japanese maple I'm special ordering is also functional, and not at all because you fell in love with the one in that botanical journal? His dimple appeared. Purely scientific interest. Olivia climbed down, brushing soil from her hands. Up close, she noticed the faint shadows beneath his eyes. Late night researching again? In truth, Ethan had been up until 3 a.m. finalizing Genesis, Tech's revolutionary sustainable energy storage system, a project that would soon dominate business headlines. But to Olivia, he was just Ethan, the plant enthusiast with thoughtful questions and a surprising knowledge of obscure botanical poetry. Something like that, he replied, following her to the workbench where she began dividing roots with practiced efficiency. You know, she said, not looking up from her work, for someone between projects, you seem awfully busy. Your phone hasn't stopped buzzing since you arrived. Ethan silenced it again, guilt flickering across his features. 3 board members, his executive assistant, and the governor of California had all tried reaching him. Just colleagues with boundary issues. Must be nice, Olivia said, gently teasing as she handed him a pot. Having colleagues? It's just me and the plants here. Sometimes I catch myself having full conversations with the Monstera. What does it say back? Ethan asked, his eyes crinkling. Mostly that I should stop undercharging for custom arrangements and actually pay myself a salary, she laughed. Though there was truth behind her words, Ethan studied her, noting the passion that animated her features despite the worry lines forming between her brows. He'd done his research. Wild Roots was drowning in debt, though its botanical collection was museum-worthy. The property developers eyeing the land had no interest in preserving it. You really love this place, he said softly. Olivia's hands stilled. It's more than a shop. My grandmother built this collection over 50 years, traveling to remote locations, trading with indigenous botanists, preserving species that might otherwise be lost. She gestured around the greenhouse. Some of these plants don't exist in the wild anymore. When they're gone forever. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. In the cutthroat world of tech, where companies rose and fell with dizzying speed, permanence was rare. Yet here stood Olivia, fighting to preserve living history with dirt under her fingernails and determination in her eyes. What if he began, then stopped himself? He'd nearly offered to buy the building outright. What if you did more educational workshops? With your knowledge, people would pay premium prices. Maybe, she said, brightening. I've thought about specialized classes. For rare plant propagation, as they worked side by side, potting seedlings, Ethan found himself sharing stories he'd told no one else about growing up with a mother who struggled with mental illness, about the sanctuary he'd found in books, about his dreams before success, had narrowed his world to boardrooms and innovation labs. When closing time came, Olivia invited him to stay for dinner, just simple vegetable soup and bread in the small apartment above the shop. The space was modest but filled with books, plants, and mismatched furniture that somehow created a sense of home Ethan's minimalist penthouse had never achieved. Over homemade soup, Olivia told him about her doctoral research in Madagascar. Cut short when her grandmother fell ill, I was studying endangered medicinal plants, she explained. There was this one species that local healers used for heart conditions. It contained compounds unlike anything in Western medicine. Ethan leaned forward, genuinely fascinated. What happened with the research? Funding dried up, she shrugged. And then grandmother needed me here. Dreams change, I guess. Later that night, returning to his penthouse, with its floor-toothed ceiling views of the city. Ethan made to calls, one to his foundation's director about a new grant program for botanical conservation, and another to a journalist friend at the Science Tribune about featuring innovative urban nurseries. Neither mentioned wild roots specifically, but Ethan knew the ripple effects would eventually reach Olivia's shore. The deception troubled him, but not enough to stop. For the first time in years, someone saw him not as wealth, not as power, just a man he wasn't ready to lose. That, not yet. "Growing Roots, I still can't believe this," Olivia said, wide-eyed as she hung up the phone. That was the event coordinator for the Governor's Climate Summit. They want Wild Roots to design and supply all the botanical installations. Ethan looked up from the rare seedlings he was helping transplant, his expression carefully neutral, despite the fact that he'd personally suggested Wild Roots to the summit organizers. "That's incredible. When is it?" 3 weeks, she said, collapsing onto a stool. "It's impossible. I'd need additional staff, transportation, supplies, .. Her excitement dimmed. "I should call them back." "Don't," Ethan said quickly. "This could change everything for Wild Roots." "But the logistics, I might know some people who could help," he offered casually. "Former colleagues with event experience." Within days, Olivia found herself with 2 experienced horticulturists between jobs who'd offered to work for modest wages. A rental company providing greenhouse equipment at promotional rates, and a local delivery service volunteering there. Electric vehicles as part of a green business initiative. Ethan watched Olivia flourish under the challenge, her confidence growing as Wild Roots transformed. The press attention from the Science Tribune feature had brought a steady stream of customers, and Mr. Donovan had suddenly become amenable to a long-term lease after a concerned community investment group expressed interest in preserving the property. "You're my good luck charm, Olivia," told Ethan one evening as they sat on her small balcony, sharing takeout after a long day of preparations. The string lights she'd hung cast a warm glow across her features, highlighting the freckles scattered across her nose. "Everything started turning around the day you walked in." Guilt and affection warred within him. In the 2 months since they'd met, Ethan had fallen deeply in love with Olivia's authenticity, her passion, her perspective on a world so different from the rarefied air he typically breathed. He'd integrated himself into her life, helping with the shop, joining her for simple dinners, even accompanying her to community garden volunteer days where no one gave him a second glance. Meanwhile, he'd been running Genesis Tech remotely, slipping away to take critical calls, working through nights, and scheduling board meetings during the hours Olivia taught workshops. The double life was exhausting, but exhilarating. Earth to Ethan, Olivia waved her hand before his face. "Where did you go just now?" He captured her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Just thinking about how different my life was before I met you." "Better or worse?" she asked, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Unquestionably better," he said with such sincerity that her smile softened. "Even though I've dragged you into repotting hundreds of plants for this summit, your research sabbatical has turned into unpaid labor." If she only knew that while helping her prepare centerpieces, he'd also approved a $50 million acquisition and restructured his executive team. "I've gained more than I've given," he said truthfully. That night, under the stars on her tiny balcony, Ethan kissed Olivia for the first time, a gentle, questioning press of lips that deepened when she sighed and leaned into him. It felt like coming home, like finding a truth he hadn't known he was seeking. As the Governor's Summit approached, Olivia worked tirelessly, her vision taking shape in elaborate living installations, showcasing endangered species and sustainable urban gardening techniques. The event would put Wild Roots on the map nationally. The night before the summit, Ethan received an urgent call from his PR director. The governor wanted to personally thank him for Genesis Tech's new sustainability initiative at the summit. His presence wouldn't just be noticed, it would be announced and celebrated. Staring at his phone, Ethan faced an impossible choice: disappoint the governor and damage his company's green initiatives, or risk Olivia discovering his deception in the most public way possible. Either way, the carefully cultivated garden of their relationship was about to face its first frost. Weathering the storm, the Governor's Climate Summit transformed the convention center into an emerald wonderland. Olivia's installations drew gasps of appreciation, living walls of rare plants, educational displays on endangered species, and innovative urban garden solutions. Wild Roots had never received such recognition, and Olivia floated through the space in a simple green dress, explaining her conservation work to influential attendees. Ethan watched from a service corridor, conflict etched across his features. He'd arrived in a separate car, telling Olivia he needed to finish some preparations. Now, dressed in the tailored suit his assistant had delivered, he looked every inch the tech billionaire the world expected to see. His executive team surrounded him, reviewing talking points for his speech and the announcement of Genesis Tech's billion-dollar commitment to sustainable energy implementation. Mr. Reed, the governor's aide, is asking when you'll be available for the preliminary photographs, his assistant said, checking her tablet. They are particularly excited about the joint announcement with Wild Roots Botanical Conservation Initiative. Ethan froze. What joint announcement? The grant program your foundation established? The press release went out this morning. Wild Roots is the first recipient, $5 million, for endangered species propagation. Horror washed over him. He'd intended the grant to be announced after he'd told Olivia the truth, not simultaneously with his public appearance. Pull it back now. It's too late, sir. Governor's already mentioned it in her opening remarks. Through the doorway, Ethan could see Olivia being approached by a summit coordinator, watching her expression shift from confusion to shock as she was handed a tablet. She read something on the screen, her face draining of color. When she looked up, her eyes scanned the room urgently until they locked with his across the distance. The betrayal that flooded her features felt like a physical blow. Before he could reach her, the governor's aide appeared, ushering Ethan toward the stage. "You're on in 2 minutes, Mr. Reed." The next hour passed in a nightmarish blur. Ethan delivered his speech mechanically, announced the sustainability initiative, and endured photographs with officials. Through it all, he searched for Olivia, but she had vanished along with her assistant and several of the smaller, portable installations. When he finally escaped to call her, his phone showed a single text: "Don't come to the shop. Everything you helped with was just manipulation. I don't know who you really are, but I know who you're not, the man I thought I loved." The rain fell mercilessly as Ethan stood outside Wild Roots later that night, watching through the windows as Olivia methodically removed all traces of his presence, the special propagation station they'd built together, the rare seedlings he'd sourced, the sketches for the garden that had never been real. When she finally noticed him, her expression hardened. She unlocked the door but blocked the entrance. "For words, explain," she demanded, her voice brittle. "I never meant to hurt you," he began. "That's 5 words and not an explanation," she cut him off. "Was any of it real? Or was I just a quaint botanical project for a bored billionaire?" "Everything between us was real," Ethan insisted. "I didn't tell you who I was because, for once, someone was seeing me, not my money or power." Olivia laughed bitterly. "While secretly using that same money and power to manipulate my life? Do you have any idea how that feels? Your business miraculously improved, not because of your hard work, but because some rich man decided to play God with your life. That wasn't my intention. Your intentions don't matter." Her voice broke. "You watched me struggle, stress over bills, work myself to exhaustion, when you could have helped honestly at any time. Instead, you chose deception."
I was going
"To tell you after the summit," Ethan said, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "I just wanted more time with you, seeing me as just Ethan." "There is no just Ethan," she said, tears mingling with raindrops on her cheeks. "That person doesn't exist. He's a character you created, and I fell in love with a fiction." "Back into the shop. The foundation grant, keep it. Wild Roots doesn't need your charity or your pity. What we had might have started with chance, but you made the choice to build it on lies." As she closed the door between them, Ethan realized that all his billions couldn't purchase what he'd just lost: trust, authenticity, and the love of a woman who had valued him for everything except the wealth that defined him to the rest of the world. Blossoming Truth. 3 months passed. Wild Roots survived without the Genesis Foundation grant, though barely. Olivia had refused Ethan's money, but couldn't refuse the publicity the summit had generated. New customers flocked to the shop, drawn by her knowledge and the rare specimens she cultivated. Still, each triumph felt hollow without Ethan to share it with. On a rain-soaked Tuesday, reminiscent of their first meeting, Olivia opened an envelope from her landlord, expecting another rent increase. Instead, she found property transfer documents, naming her as the new owner of the building with a note, "No strings attached. The property is yours free and clear." This isn't a gesture for forgiveness, but for preservation of something irreplaceable. Furious, she drove through the downpour. To Genesis Tech headquarters, a gleaming tower of sustainable architecture. The receptionist's eyes widened when Olivia demanded to see Ethan Reed. "Mr. Reed isn't here," she said carefully. "Hasn't been for some time." "Then where is he?" Olivia insisted. The executive who eventually greeted her, Patricia Wong, now acting CEO, led Olivia to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the stormy city. "Ethan stepped down as CEO 2 months ago," Patricia explained, sliding a tablet across the table. "He's transferred majority control to the employee ownership program and his voting shares to our sustainability board." The tablet showed news headlines. "Tech billionaire surrenders control in unprecedented move." Reed disappears from public eye after corporate restructuring. Former Genesis CEO spotted in Madagascar working with botanical researchers. "Madagascar," Olivia whispered, her anger giving way to confusion. Patricia nodded. "He mentioned something about endangered medicinal plants and unfinished research. Said someone once told him that dreams don't have to change, just the path to reaching them." Attached to the tablet was a sealed envelope with Olivia's name. Inside, she found coordinates, a hand-drawn map. And a pressed leaf she recognized immediately, the rare medicinal plant she'd abandoned her research on years ago. 3 days later, Olivia stepped off a small plane onto Madagascar soil, following the coordinates to a remote research station. There, in a modest open-air laboratory surrounded by lush vegetation, stood Ethan, tanned, in worn field clothes. His hair longer and curling at his neck as he bent over plant specimens. He looked up, freezing when he saw her. "Olivia, you bought my building," she said, the accusation lacking its former heat. "Actually, I didn't," he replied, setting down his tools. "I created a land trust for endangered botanical conservation sites. Wild Roots was the first property transferred into it. You're the trust administrator. The building is legally yours to run however you see fit, forever protected from development. And this?" She gestured to the research station. "This is what you started years ago," he said, leading her to the specimens. "Your grandmother got sick. Funding dried up. Healers remembered you. The compounds you were studying, they could revolutionize cardiac treatment. The research was too important to stay abandoned. So you just picked up where I left off." "Funded it," he corrected. "The local botanists are doing the actual work. I'm just learning from them, documenting, connecting resources." Olivia studied him, this man who had walked away from billions in power to sit on a dirt floor with indigenous healers. "Why didn't you tell me, after everything?" "Would you have believed anything I said?" His eyes held hers steadily. "Or would you have seen it as another manipulation?" She had no answer. "I needed to show you, not tell you," he continued. "Not with grand gestures or money, but with choices and actions that prove who I really am. Not just Ethan Reed the billionaire, or just Ethan the deception, but the real me, who fell in love with you, who sees the value in what you fight to preserve." Olivia moved closer, examining the plants they'd both traveled across the world to study. "You left everything behind." "Not everything," he said quietly. "It's the parts that were never really me." She touched a delicate leaf. "I'm still angry." "You have every right to be, and I don't trust you completely." "I wouldn't expect you to." "But," she said, finally meeting his gaze fully, "I flew halfway around the world because, despite everything, I believe there's something real between us, worth salvaging like these plants, rare and worth the effort to preserve. Ethan reached for her hand tentatively. When she didn't pull away, he interlaced their fingers. I've learned that the most precious things can't be bought or controlled. They can only be nurtured with patience, honesty, and care. Outside, the tropical rain began to fall, different from the city showers where they'd first met, but familiar. In its rhythm, they stood together among the endangered plants, two people stripped of pretenses, beginning again with truth as their foundation. I can't promise it will be easy, Olivia said. The most valuable growth never is, Ethan replied. The wisdom of both gardens and human hearts evident in his words, and there, surrounded by the rarest of botanical treasures, they began the careful, intentional work of cultivating something equally precious, a love rooted in truth, strong enough to weather any storm.